dead simple. I think I tried this before, so let me remove the name. And let me just run Alpine and the date. We can't get much more simple than that. It looks like Docker knew how to run that and run the date command. So at this point, if I take Riddler, and what I'm going to do each time I run Riddler, I'm going to say, here's the ID space size, 64K is common, sort of a traditional Linux distro, at least before we had 2 to the 32 ID space. The expected ID space in a lot of tools was I have 64K IDs, and I'm going to root that at ID 100,000. If you use user namespaces in LXC or elsewhere, or just your Ubuntu distro setup defaults, that's usually what you're handed is a 64K space rooted at ID 100,000. Now I provide the name of the Docker container that I just ran, and Riddler is going to, I didn't name that one, so that didn't make much sense. Just to make it easy, obviously I could use the long ID, but let's give it a name so this command is simpler, and didn't make a directory for that. Let's do that. So we have them all in separate places. So we have a config JSON that's been created. Text good size for back of the room. Basically okay. So let's look at so this is what Riddler did. It talked to the Docker engine. It asked about the Alpine. It basically Docker inspected Alpine. It knew that I ran the date command, so it's plugged that in. It's set up a more limited set of capabilities than OCI tools, I think, but it's about similar to what Docker gives you. It's actually added an AppArmor profile. That's the one that the Docker engine installs. So we have AppArmors supported. What else is interesting here? There's the mounts, and here are the specifics about the user namespaces. So I said ID 100,000, size 64K. It's put that in the UID and GID mappings, which will be used. There's a bunch of default devices. And then here are obviously the namespaces. Obviously, if you've used Docker and you do --pid equals host, if I took out the PID namespace, that would be similar to running with my PID namespace as a host. So these are the isolation primitives that the kernel is offering you, and by default, we're asking for ourselves to be placed in all the namespace isolations, including the user namespace, the last one listed there. And then, again, in a few minutes, we'll look a little more at setcomp, but here, Riddler has inserted a very similar profile to the one that the Docker engine does. So it's, by default, not allowing syscalls, and then it has an extremely long list of the accepted syscalls, and later we can go in and kind of modify those and see how that affects our application. So far so good. We've got a config JSON, but yet I don't have a file system yet. And so here's my little wrapper script. I'm going to export, put that up higher so you can see that. I'm going to export a container as root file system, and I need to match that user namespace settings that I told Riddler. I need to give export rootfs the same information, so rooted at UID 100,000 for 65K, and the name of the container was Alpine. So it's created that rootfs here in my directory. So now I have a config JSON and a root file system. So at this point, that looks like a Alpine small Linux distro, so all looks good. And if I look at the file ownership, it's owned by ID 100,000, GID 100,000, so I think I'm good. If I ask RunC to run my container, so the only bummer is that the environment default path did not come over, the Riddler did not write that, so let's try that. So I changed it to bin date, so I don't care about having a path. And you can see I've done the same thing, Docker run Alpine, I've now converted that to RunC. Not very exciting, but it does work. So let's do something a little more interesting. Let's say